Okay, good morning, Tahoe. We're going to call this meeting to order of the TRPA Operations and Governance Committee. The date is Wednesday, August 27th, and the time is 8:32. Maria, can we please call the roll call for a quorum?
Mr. Aguilar,
Here.
Mr. Bass,
Here.
Miss Holloway,
Here.
Miss Hill,
Here.
Miss Lane,
Here.
Mr. Rice. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, great. I'll go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. Remote committee members, please raise your hand to speak and mute your microphone unless speaking to cut down on background noise. I'd like to ask that all remote members turn on your camera if you are able. Remote members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. If you're viewing the webinar on a personal computer in the room, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment. You will be called to the front to speak. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment, state your name, and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. The first item on our agenda is the public comment period for the items on the agenda. Comments on other matters may be redirected to the public interest comment before adjournment of the meeting. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand. You'll be called on to speak in the front of the room. Remote attendees, click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by TRPA staff. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Are there any members of the public that are here in the room that would like to comment on any item on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to our Zoom participants.
Madam Chair, we have one hand raised to make a comment. Ann Nichols, please go ahead and address the committee.
Welcome, Ann.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm hoping that it's okay for me to comment on TRPA failures as evidenced by the agenda today. Is that all right?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Yesterday at Washoe County Commissioners, there were 260 resident signatures or petitions that opposed the Tahoe Area Basin changes submitted to Washoe County. The video is I'm going to send it to you so you all can watch it. And the amendments took center stage, and it just shows you how out of touch the TRPA with its groupthink and PR machine is from the community. There were 260 resident signatures on petitions. There were 24 people there against it. There was only against the Tahoe Basin Plan area changes, and there was only one speaker in favor, and it was a Alexis Hills nominated person. So there was a really well-spoken people why this is not good regarding fire safety. You know, even the tourism, it was just in the paper, the RSCVA said we're going to be, 3.9 million tourists in 2026, which will be a 3% jump. And we already have, we're already stuck. It's going to take 6.5 hours to evacuate Incline. So my point is, on this governance, you guys need to start listening. One commissioner, Mike Clark, voted in support of the public and got a big hand and many thanks. And he listened, and you guys just aren't listening. It was funny because the commissioners go, oh, you need to, we have to pass this because TRPA will do it if we don't. And then they advised us to go back to TRPA with our grievances because they can't do anything about it. So, this is just a shocking way to manage Tahoe. And basically, you guys are trying to rezone the entire lake the same way. I hope you'll start listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols, for your comments. Probably in the future, that would have been more appropriate to come under comments not on the agenda, but I'm glad that you were able to share those with us this morning. And always appreciate your participation. So are there any other members of the public on Zoom?
No other comments.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and close public comments and we'll move to approval of the agenda. Staff, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes.
Okay, any changes from my,
Motion to approve.
okay, move to approve. Thank you. There's a motion and a second, even though we don't always need a second in Nevada, but there you go. Better more than not enough. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. We'll move to approval of the minutes. We're now on agenda item number 3. The minutes from June 25th, 2025 can be found on page 7. Are there any members of the committee who wish to make a change?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. There's a motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Do we need to do a roll call vote on the minutes? Okay, thank you. All right, perfect. Thank you to my colleagues. Moving right along. Let's go to item number 4, which is discussion and possible recommendation for approval of the July financials. This information can be found on page 63, and I'll turn this over to Mr. Cox.
Good morning. Thank you. This is Chad Cox, TRPA finance leader for the record. Hey, so we're getting into a new fiscal year. July's off to a good start. July typically starts off a little bit slow because we're working to clean out and finish our fiscal year 2025. So as you can see here, some of the highlights, we have invoiced and received both states appropriations. We invoiced in July, received in August. This is a little bit behind last year. Last year, I think we received it in July as an agency. On the Nevada side, the state had to work to get those DMV funds appropriated before they could pass it along to us. So it took a couple extra weeks, which is totally fine. And then Nevada, we did receive our appropriation via check last week. So it's good. We've got our state appropriations in. So, our revenues at 29% of the budget because we get those state revenues up front and then we spend those throughout the year. And then from an expenditure perspective, we only had about 700,000 of expenditures, which is mainly our compensation for the month of July. If we jump to the next slide, I'll kind of go through detail. Usually this is a little more flavorful because we go through each of the items, but as you can see, the main driver of the revenue was the state appropriations, as I discussed. From a grant perspective, no grant income. All of our grant invoicing and focus was clearing out and finishing fiscal year 25 in July for that last quarter, and ensuring that we're caught up for that year as we're going through our fiscal year 25 audit currently. Our fees were around $600,000. This is inclusive of a $95,000 settlement, which we received. Also, our AIS program is strong this time of year. We had a couple $100,000 of AIS fees, where we're doing boat inspections. It's a busy time of year in July. And then our permitting fees were actually down a little bit versus last month, meaning June. And that's because we had our lottery for the piers in June, which is a big slug. We only do that every couple of years. So we have that 30-day period where folks put in permits for that lottery. So it's down sequentially. We're going to keep an eye on those fees, and it's something that we look at each month. But in general, fees look fine. Local revenues, we'll invoice those, and that's where each of the counties pay. We're doing the analysis currently, where we look at property values to determine how that 150 gets split by county. So we'll be doing that in September. So you'll see that come in later this quarter. Rent revenue, we'll catch up on a little bit. It should, if you look at 6% of the year, We're actually 8% through, so we got to catch up a little bit on that. I think it's just a singular invoice. And then other revenue, that's our investment income that we book quarterly for the LAIF account, which is our California fund. So that will come in on a quarterly basis. So no concerns. Everything looks good. And I don't know if there's any questions. Yeah.
Fee for service.
Yeah.
Do you?
Sure, Michael.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Stephanie Holloway for the record. The fee for service number, do you look at that on a year-over-year basis?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Year over year, it's actually also down slightly. But when I look at 2022 and 2023, we're in line. Those fees for service this month were around 170,000. I think the 3-year average is around 180. So it's down slightly, but not materially. And we'll just, like I said, we kind of keep an eye on it. The team's definitely busy processing stuff. And we've seen our fees for service since I started about a year ago just continue to ramp. There's been a lot of activity there. So it's the first time it's kind of gone down sequentially versus June and a little bit versus last year. So we'll continue to keep an eye on it. Yep.
Great. Any other questions of my colleagues in the room? Okay, any questions by my colleagues online?
Okay.
All right.
We'll keep jumping over to expenses. Expenses are quick, right? It is just compensation is the main driver here. We did have a lot of contracts paid. So also we want to get our contracts set up and paid and basically accrued back to fiscal year 2025. So we did have a lot of processing occurring, but it was for last year's stuff. So the main driver in expenses here is comp. And yeah, it's a slow start. I went back and looked at last year as well. We didn't present the July financials to y'all last year, but looking at the numbers, it's pretty typical as to how a July will be. And then we get into ramping and implementing our programs, here as we go through the fiscal year.
Go time.
Yeah, no mitigation expenses came out. I did see actually one of the projects we about $100,000 went out in our AP run this week for mitigation. So we'll see that number from some of the approved projects last year hit in August.
Great.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Last slide here is on cash flow. So as you can see here, the cash flow is negative coming into the year, which is similar to 2023. 2023 is the other dashed line there, the red dashed line. Sorry, 2024 is the dashed line. 2025 is where we got the state appropriations in, which is why that line showed a positive cash flow in the month of July. Like I said, no concerns here. The reason it's that way is because of the payments for 2025 fiscal invoices. This will be good. We have plenty of cash in the bank, and as those state appropriations came in here in August, you'll see a big kind of $8 million uptick as we look at this next month.
Yeah, this is very typical for this time of year. That's
Yeah.
what that graph always looks like.
Totally.
Okay,
Yep.
Cool. Any questions of Mr. Cox on the July financials? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the board to approve. Thank you. There's a motion. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Holloway. Yes. Mr. Rice. Thank you, Mr. Rice. I heard you. And Ms. Lane.
Yes,
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
great, thank you. We'll move forward to item number 5, which is discussion and possible recommendation for approval of release of El Dorado County Operations and Maintenance Mitigation Funds in the amount of $30,000. This item, this is for a project at the Cattleman's Basin Black Bart retrofit project. And this information can be found on page 83 of your packet. I'd like to turn this over to Ms. Campbell to present the item.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Tracy Campbell with the EIP department here at TRPA. With this request, as you mentioned, on behalf of El Dorado County for $30,000 in operations and maintenance funds towards the Castleman's Basin Blackbot retrofit project. Castleman's Basin was built as part of the Pioneer Trail Erosion Control Project, and those basins were completed back in 2021. But since then, the basins have transitioned really into wet basins with the outlets submerged underwater for most of the year. So this proposed retrofit project will modify the current outlet structures so that they're above the water, and that will help with just maintenance and monitoring, especially when it comes to stormwater runoff and to removing sediment where that's necessary. So as with all O&M requests, local match is required, and in this instance, the match will come from El Dorado County's Road Fund. We have El Dorado's Stormwater Coordinator, Russ Weigart, on the line if you have any questions, and with that, I will pass it back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Weigart. Are there any questions of my colleagues on this particular item? Nope, seeing none in the room. Any of my colleagues online have questions? Seeing none, then we'll bring it back to the board or to the committee for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, may we please have a roll call vote?
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Holloway,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Great. That brings us to item number 6, which is an overview of the mitigation funds program. This is an information only item, and this item can be found on page 349. I have been asking some questions around this particular item, so thank you for bringing it forward to the committee. And again, I'll turn this over to Ms. Campbell to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, for the record, Tracy Campbell with the EIP department. So just to refer to that, Ms. Lane, following our May Ops and Governance Committee, you asked some additional background on the Mitigation Fund program. And I think that question came up in connection with the Emerald Bay pilot project,
Correct.
which was the first mitigation request we've had that involved more than one jurisdiction. And you may remember that was both Placer and El Dorado County. So you're interested in hearing how those cross-jurisdictional requests, and then just more generally, how the mitigation funds work. With that, we're going to just bring this very brief informational item and overview of the program itself. We'll start with the background and intent of the program. We'll outline the process and the different fund categories, so you can just see the types of projects are supported. We'll touch on the allowable uses, so you can see the flexibility and in some cases the boundaries of the program. And we'll also address that specific question about cross-jurisdictional requests. Overall, the goal is to just draw a wider frame around how the program works and give you a clear picture. And we'll show some examples of mitigation funds in action. It's not as long as it sounds, I promise. So for background and to just draw that wide frame, it's really important to note that mitigation funds are a key element of the regional plan. To protect Lake Tahoe and achieve environmental goals, the regional plan employs conservation programs, a regulatory framework to stop harm and protect sensitive areas, limits on new development, environmental standards for new projects and redevelopment, and restoration and transportation projects underneath the Environmental Improvement Program. All of these elements work together, and the one thing that connects them is the Mitigation Fund Program. So in brief, the purpose of the program is to offset the environmental impacts of development in the region. Depending on the type of project and its impacts, applicants are required to pay mitigation fees. Those fees are then directed to shovel-ready EIP projects that reduce or offset their environmental impact. This slide just shows the process in a little bit more detail. Starts with the project applicant and obviously a project. As part of the permit approval process, the applicant will pay mitigation fees to TRPA. TRPA then allocates those fees into the relevant accounts, whether that's water quality, mobility mitigation, or excess coverage. From there, when the local jurisdictions or the state land banks have a project, they can submit a request for funding. The request is vetted by TRPA staff. It comes to this committee for review and recommendation, and then on to the full governing board for final approval, and most often that's on the consent calendar. Once approved, those funds can then be dispersed and put to work on EIP projects, which is where it translates into on-the-ground benefit. So now let's look at what those mitigation funds can actually be used for. First, every project has to be shovel-ready and identified either on the 5-year EIP priority list, Environmental Improvement Program, sorry, Julie, or in the Regional Transportation Plan. From there, the funds get directed into several main categories. We've got water quality, which supports erosion control and water quality improvements. We have stream environment zone restoration, and that's 25% of those water quality funds are set aside specifically for those sensitive areas. Mobility mitigation funds go towards transportation infrastructure improvements. Operation and maintenance funds cover ongoing maintenance monitoring, and they also can be used for a one-time admin cost for an EIP project. Like the SEZ fund, O&M comes from a 25% set aside from both mobility mitigation and water quality. And finally, excess coverage mitigation funds can be used by both the state land banks, and that's California Tahoe Conservancy in California, and on the Nevada side, Nevada Division of State Lands. And they can use them to acquire and retire sensitive land coverage. So as mentioned, all the above funds must go towards shovel-ready projects. And I was remiss in mentioning this on this slide, but there is one small but really mighty exception, and that's the interest on these accounts. So unlike the principal funds, those dollars can be used for earlier in the project cycle. They're much more flexible, so they can be used for things like planning and design, and that makes them really useful. They can fill critical funding gaps at the beginning of a project, when those funds can be really hard to find and can often make the difference between a project being able to move forward. They're also often used as match, and that means we can leverage much larger federal or state funding sources. This chart shows a little bit more detail on the different types of mitigation funds, purpose, jurisdictional scope, and relevant code or policy references, if you have insomnia. But this is where we can address that question about cross-jurisdictional use. As you can see, only mobility mitigation funds can be used across jurisdictions. And that's because transportation infrastructure usually serves multiple jurisdictions and regional users. So the code allows those funds to be applied in a broader way. Currently, all the other funds must stay within the jurisdiction where the fees were collected. Emerald Bay Pilot Project was the first example of a multi-jurisdictional request, as we mentioned, and it shows how those funds can be used to support cross-boundary projects where it makes sense. Moving over to the numbers quickly, this slide shows contribution disbursements over the last 5 years. You'll see that contributions fluctuate depending on the level of development activity, and likewise disbursements also vary, just reflecting the readiness of those EIP projects. In 22, for example, disbursements were quite a bit lower than contributions, and then in 24, disbursements exceeded the fees collected by over $2 million, and that was really down to the Motel 6 acquisition. This table shows contributions and disbursements broken down by fund. Over the past 5 years, we've collected over 15.5 million and dispersed just over 15 million. So while in any given year it does fluctuate, you can see that over a longer period, it balances out really. And while we're on the numbers, we're just digging into the weeds a bit here. This slide gives a sense of what a typical project applicant might pay in fees. And this is based on a couple of existing permits we have at the moment. So on the left, you'll see a simple home addition adding 500 square feet of coverage. And most of the permit applications that come in are made up of these types of addition or modification applications. So for this project, the only mitigation fee that applies is for water quality, and that comes out at just over $900. On the right, you see an example of a new single family dwelling, which adds significantly more coverage and also generates a new residential unit, meaning that more vehicle miles are traveled, more VMT. So for this project, the water quality fee is around $3,300, and the mobility mitigation fee, which also applies to mitigate that additional VMT, is just over $7,000. So the types of fees will vary depending on the project size and its impacts. But these examples are, as I say, based on current applications. And one other thing to mention is that the mitigation fee amounts are regularly reviewed to ensure they're both fair and able to support their intended purpose. We work with local governments and EIP partners to evaluate them and update, and those updates do need to receive governing board approval. So in closing, just remind you of a few of the recent EIP projects that show those mitigation fees in action. I've got 6 slides, but I'll be super quick. I just didn't want to leave any of the jurisdictions out. So these images are for the city's Tahoe Valley Greenbelt and Stormwater Improvement Project. Over the past 4 years, the city have used a combination of various mitigation fund accounts. They've also used interest funds for some of the planning and design elements. These images show El Dorado County's South Tahoe Greenway project, where mitigation funds were used to support a mile-long extension to the Macchiata Memorial Greenway and replace a storm-damaged bridge over the Upper Truckee River. This shows Kale Drive's complete street project. As we all know, that street was highly degraded. This project will transform Kale Drive by improving drainage, adding sidewalks, bikeways, crosswalks, improving intersection safety, and undergrounding the overhead utilities. Just last year, you approved 3,000 in mitigation funds for that project. These photos show Placer County's Kings Beach Watershed Improvement Project, where $500,000 of funds joined a Forest Service grant of over $800,000 to fully fund a water quality project. It stabilized roads, added pavement, sidewalks, and parking for beachgoers. And this is phase 2 of Washoe County's Lower Wood Creek water quality improvement project. I like these images because you see the before, during, and post-construction. $500,000 of mitigation funds completed a funding package to install that stormwater infrastructure. And finally, excess coverage funds have been used most recently on the California side to support the acquisition of the Van Sickle parcel. And before that, the purchase of the Motel 6 property. And then on the Nevada side, that's the images on the left on this slide. In 23, and the Nevada Division of State Lands used excess coverage funds to restore and retire over 22,000 square feet of sensitive land coverage at a parcel on Kingsbury. So just to wrap up, final key points. First, per the regional plan, the mitigation fund program is essential to making sure that as development happens, it also contributes to protecting the environment. Second, these funds are critical because they don't just stand alone. They often provide local match to help secure much larger state and federal grants. And finally, as you can see from the project examples, the program is working the way it was intended. Fees are being collected, they're being invested in shovel-ready projects, and then those projects are delivering real environmental benefit on the ground. And with that, I will pass it back to you for any questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. And I love how you say contributes. I want to integrate that into my head. It's such a great way. It sounds so much better than contributes, right? Contributes. Love it. Thank you for that presentation. That really helps me kind of understand. And I know a lot of times we get complaints from, our people that are developing single family residents that the fees are just so astronomical, and it's part of what makes affordable housing not that affordable. And I have, great deference to that, but then I see what these funds go to and how they're being used and the great projects that everyone is doing within the jurisdictions. And I go, wow, it does make sense. And I hope that there's a way that we can kind of get this out to the public, that these fees, as large as they seem, $7,000, they go a long way and they make a big difference. It's helping us stabilize the environment. So very cool. Are there any questions of my colleagues on this information only report? Ms. Holloway.
I just had a comment and, thank you to TRPA staff because, I was in conversation regarding the Emerald Bay pilot request. I think, just to give a little bit of color on that conversation and how we got to a point where, Placer did come in and agree to use the interest piece of those funds on the mobility fees. Just to kind of give a little complexity, our traffic mitigation fee program in Placer County was transitioned, at least in the Tahoe area, to go away from kind of a level of service based infrastructure program to more of a VMT reducing program in a number of years ago. And with that, we, myself included, spent a bunch of time with TRPA staff looking at the transition of this mobility fee program as well, because there was overlap. And so I think there was a concern on both sides that we could potentially be double dipping on new development related to the VMT. So we did coordinate. Our board took some of our fee funding out of our program in exchange for the fees that TRPA was collecting for the mobility fund. So I think it's important to kind of understand, at least in Placer, I don't know about the other fee programs, local jurisdiction fee programs, but those two programs are somewhat tied together as we're looking at utilization of at least the principal portion of the fees collected. But I'm really happy with where we got with using the interest. And, I think in talking to Supervisor Gustafson as well, more of that, making sure that we, understand and are appreciative of the fact that transportation doesn't just stay within one local jurisdiction, it crosses boundaries, and supporting efforts in the region as well.
Thank you for that, Ms. Holloway, and thank you for that partnership as well. Was really appreciated. And I think Placer County just feels to be a little bit ahead of the curve when, especially when I look at El Dorado County. So we kind of look up to you and we follow a lot in your footsteps, and your knowledge of the basin is, I think, one of the things that's missing with El Dorado County. They kind of go, that's the basin. We don't really pay attention to it. So I really appreciate your leadership in this area and plan to follow in your footsteps as much as possible. Thank you. Any other questions of my colleagues? I see Ms. Hill has her hand up, and I know our executive director would like to chime in too. So Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm so glad you brought this. And I was hoping perhaps offline if the team could help me understand where Washoe County stands with our fees, because I'm with you, Madam Chair. I think that there's a lot of opportunities that I'm seeing Placer do a really great job of taking advantage of, and I just want to make sure that we can learn from Placer, and I don't want to leave any money on the table for potential projects. So that would be a great thing for me to learn offline. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to be part of that conversation as well and understand this even better. Ms. Reagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Good morning, board members and staff and the public. Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. I just wanted to say what a wonderful presentation this was. Tracy did a great job of breaking down what is a fairly complex program at Lake Tahoe. And we very much appreciated the chair's question to bring this. It's something we've been talking about internally to do a bit of a road show in some targeted areas around the basin, around the question of fees. In my couple decades at TRPA, I agree with the chair. We do get a lot of questions. Well, where are those fees going? Are they just going to, feather the nest of TRPA? You hear that kind of negativity in certain circles, certainly not widespread, but and it's not true, because the money goes back to the jurisdictions largely for community benefits that benefit the lake and our infrastructure of our communities. And it's really obvious when you show those examples. So I wanted to point out a little even deeper history. When you think of the development framework at the lake, think back to the first regional plan of 1987 and how different the situation was then as it is now. And at that point in the late 80s, there were well over 10,000 vacant parcels that some interest in the basin wanted to see zero development on those vacant parcels, that had not been built. And some wanted, to see all of them be developed to max capacity. And so the essential compromise of land use in Tahoe is always a balance of interest that protects the lake, but that honors private property rights. And the mitigation fund programs were a very big part of that essential compromise between the states, between the interests, between all of the stakeholders and that were engaged at the time, to make sure that development was not harming the lake and that we were putting back in monies to benefit our environmental thresholds and our standards that also help our quality of life in our communities. So it's a really interesting program. You fast forward to today, there's very few, vacant parcels remaining undeveloped. And I just think it's fascinating that, you took the action right before this to release funds to El Dorado County. We sometimes do that as a matter of routine business, but it was not routine at one time. And we do need to remind the community where these monies go. We hold them in trust, essentially, for projects that have to meet the criteria that's very specific, as Tracy very nicely laid out. But then there's benefits that are, leveraging other funds. And I wanted to also point out, particularly for Member Hill's question just a moment ago, the local jurisdictions have come very much to rely on these funds for infrastructure projects because we have, a very small, what's considered, rural population sizes in the basin of year-round residents. And we have big urban infrastructure needs. And so it's very difficult for local governments to come up with funds to do the kind of projects that we need to invest in. When you look at the kind of pattern of land use and development we had, we didn't even have sidewalks on Highway 50, right?
Right.
Madam Chair, for many years. And so these funds leverage very large other public, federal or state, private philanthropy. So it's part of that mix of that environmental improvement program, EPIC collaboration that we do. And we sometimes just go about our business. So thank you for asking the question for us to tease this out for the committee. And we'd like to be able, to take a shortened version of this around maybe to, the architects and engineers groups and all of some of the other more construction related groups, because we actually have done analysis that these kind of mitigation fees, and if you even add in other fees like public utility district hookups, they really are not what is driving the cost escalation of affordable housing. They're a very small percentage. It's land costs and construction costs. But people do have this opinion that's widely known in certain circles. So thank you for asking the question and giving us a chance to share this with you. And we'll take this on the road in the community going forward.
That's great. I see Mr. Bass, you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Curious just as far as the mitigation fees that get applied to when a building has been vacated and hasn't had let's call it a certificate of occupancy. I believe it's a period of 5 years. These mitigation fees get applied to what may not be new construction, but because it's being, a vacant building, it kind of becomes considered new construction. And can you speak a little bit to where that threshold is kind of being set, and is there any review to it? I think in our community, at least in South Lake, we have seen these fees kind of push people off from wanting to bring a building back to life based on them, and I think that's been somewhat, not that I disagree that they do great things, and that I think that definitely on new projects I without a doubt agree with them, but it can be hard to see somebody walk away from an existing parcel or project because of the fees being applied to an existing building. So can you address that for us, Mr. Reagan?
Thank you, Member Bass. Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. Great question. The question is related to that mobility mitigation fee, the new embodiment of what we used to call the air quality mitigation fee. If you remember that chart that Tracy broke down all the different fees, it used to be a straight up air quality mitigation fee that transitioned, several years ago to this mobility mitigation fee, as Member Holloway just mentioned as well. So we've been in a transition. At that time, that requirement for a project shifted slightly. We used to have a rule that if a building had been vacant more than 7 years with no activity, you couldn't count the trips before to credit that for your mitigation for air quality. At the time when that was negotiated as part of the last cycle during the regional transportation plan, we went to 5 years. And so just to reiterate what Mr. Bass said, you basically, let's say you have a hotel that sits empty for more than 5 years now. You have to assume that's just like a brand new project, and you don't get to credit the trips for vehicle miles traveled that used to be associated with the former use. And then particularly if it changes from one use to another, there are trip calculators, like a restaurant might be more than a certain other use, so it's a fairly complicated system. And what we've committed to do is to look at that again, because it has been several years since that went into place. And, is there a barrier to reinvestment and redevelopment? Because we want to see blighted properties that are sitting abandoned and not used. We want to see those activated. We want to see environmental improvements in the process of redevelopment. And so I do believe we're actually coming to City Council per the request of the city team to talk about this and looking at this as we update our impact assessment tool and some other things. But there was a compromise around this just about, less than 5 years ago. And so I think we're willing to roll up our sleeves and look at, we don't want to have another barrier. There are others, whether this is the deal breaker or not, I think we want to dig in and look at some specific examples perhaps. But there's a reason for that, because there will be new traffic on some of those properties. And we know that's what we're trying to offset as part of the fees, and then put those monies back into the jurisdiction to help with transit or, other transportation improvements. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Dan Segan, to jump to the microphone if there's anything that I might have missed, since he is the expert. And we have Michelle Glickert and other team members that are also experts in this.
Thanks, Julie. Dan Segan again for the record. The practice of waiving the fee for a change in use is fairly common. And the idea of setting a 5-year window where that fee is raised is as an incentive for fast redevelopment. And jurisdictions set that, as Julie mentioned, at various time periods. So some places it's 5 years, some places it's 2 years, some places it's 10 years. But the idea is that if you're offering this fee waiver, it's an additional incentive for that property not to remain vacant for an extended period of time. So as Member Bass asked, the idea behind it is that so you're setting an incentive for a period of time, and then you have a question that arises: if that incentive doesn't work to promote that redevelopment in that short period of time, then does it become a disincentive because that property is treated like any other property? And that's some of the discussions we're having related to the mobility mitigation fee now, and whether or not we should reconsider that period of time, or reconsider that period of time in certain areas or for certain properties that have remained blighted for a long period of time and are priorities for redevelopment right now.
Mr. Segan, have you thought about maybe doing like a shorter period to try to incentivize these coming back quicker, and then a scale after that? So like a 30% reduction if in 3 years, and 60%. Yeah, it would probably go the other way. You know what I mean?
We've thought about the latter part of that, where the fee would be scaled down or
Right.
scaled back up. We have not thought about reducing the 5-year window, because we've been told that it takes about that amount of time to get a project on the ground, fully approved and move forward. And so we've not heard from many people that they can just turn around a project in a year or two, but that's something we could consider as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bass, for raising that question. And this whole program is just fascinating and important. And thank you for TRPA staff for taking the time to educate us and
Yeah,
continue
no, I
that
very much
education.
appreciate it as well. I do, I see the point of it, and I'm curious that, all of our jurisdictions are very different, and we face different challenges. And so is there a consideration to possibly give, through maybe an MOU, local jurisdictions somewhat, I would say, not leeway to waive the fees, but, or yeah, I guess actually for certain projects, can we look at it at a jurisdictional level for our own building and planning departments to potentially waive the fees? I consistently look at our Chevy's building, because we have had this fee actually stop, that building from coming back to life. And so that's where I always get hung up, as that one project. But I'm just curious, like, ways that we can try to make those things come to life, and then knowing that in certain places it's going to be different. So I just wonder, is it better to leave it at a jurisdictional level to let us do that waive or exemption?
Dan Segan again. It's certainly something that we can consider. Going back to Tracy's presentation, the fees collected are held in account for the city to use. And they, as Tracy went over, they use it for various projects like sidewalks, like other transportation initiatives. And so if there was other ways to fund those within the city's purview, then it's really just a color of money type issue. So I think it's something we could consider as we look at how the fees are used and where those dollars are coming from. All of this relates back to the RTP that you all adopted not too long ago, and implementing the projects of the RTP. And it's certainly, it's $100 million RTP, and we're talking about $1 million a year in mobility mitigation fees at most that we're collecting. So this is not, we're not trying to implement the entire RTP on the backs of development within the region, but it does provide a core source of funding for some of those projects that we want to see on the ground. Stephanie?
Excellent,
Yeah,
thank you.
Marlene, I just want
Ms.
to
Holloway.
maybe make a comment to add to Julie's history here, but Stephanie Holloway for the record from Placer County. So I do remember this conversation of the change of use and you know, the conversation I think at this board also paralleled some of the state law, at least in California. So for the 3 jurisdictions here in California, SB 743 did come into play around VMT, and there are some, don't quote me, I am not the expert on SB 743 anymore, but I do remember there was conversation with our legal teams about just what term we could look at a change of use under that state law as well. So I think as you're moving forward and looking at that, just making sure we're paralleling or at least working with the California jurisdictions on that state law as well. The other thing I'll say, you know, I think it's practice. I won't say it's standard practice that, you know, we get requests before the Placer County Board regarding not necessarily TRPA's mitigation fees, but our own mitigation fees under CEQA law. And I do know that our board has, you know, on occasion used other funds to sort of offset. So I think to what Dan is saying is really just a color of money, but they are mitigation, and at least under California Environmental Quality Act law, we are required to at least supplant or replace those funds in ways that are under the board's purview too. So I think, again, just kind of paralleling with that, you know, practice in California that we're all also kind of paralleling with. So.
Yeah, thank you for that additional history and just a fascinating and great conversation. Ms. Hill, you still have your hand up, but is that from your earlier comments?
Yes, although I was just thinking about Member Bass's discussion about I don't know if it would be called a mitigation fee, but, and this is for another day, certainly, to talk about this, but of a fee on large homes. And I know that that's something that we looked at in Washoe or in Washoe, Tahoe, and also Douglas this last session, and that bill didn't go through, but maybe it's something we should continue to talk about as a board as well for additional consideration.
All right, well, I think we've just scratched the surface and more to be, you know, to be continued. So thank you for that. Again, this was an information only item. We're going to go ahead and move to the next item, which is the quarterly treasurer's report, which is also an information only item. This can be found in your packet on page 465. Mr. Cox.
Thank you. Chad Cox for the record again, TRPA finance lead. Hey, just real quick, wanted to give you an update on our investments. We've got $39.1 million in balance. It is important to note that 25 million of that is in trust for things like what we just discussed, the mobility mitigation, and also securities is another example of something we would hold in trust. You know, from a market perspective, interest rates are interesting right now, right? We saw the Fed cut interest rates back in December, but there hasn't been a move since. There's been anticipation, but no move. So basically the federal funds rate remains unchanged. In July, there's still anticipation that it'll potentially reduce in September, but I guess we'll see. I'm sure y'all have been seeing that in the news. So, you know, treasuries in general haven't changed a ton. The 1-year treasury is yielding 4%. At the end of July, it's down directionally. I think that may be an anticipation of, you know, a potential change, but overall relatively flat since the last time we discussed. Let's see, 10-year bonds are yielding 4.3%, which is still similar also to the last time we discussed. You know, from a TRPA investment perspective, we still remain really conservative with that balance. 68% of that balance is in the state pools, so the California LAIF and the Nevada LGIP funds. 21% of that balance is in treasuries, and 11% is in corporate securities. We've seen the corporate securities percentage of the total creep up a little bit because we're getting a little bit of a higher rate there. That falls within our policy is no more than 20% in corporate security. So we're well within that threshold, and we're doing that to yield just a little bit higher overall. There have been no corporate security ratings changes. That's one thing we also look at in our policy. If a security drops in its rating, that may be something we would consider selling or moving away from, but there's been no corporate security changes. Now, in May, it was interesting, though, Moody's actually downgraded treasuries. They've been hanging on. There's two other agencies, Fitch and Standard & Poor's, that had downgraded treasuries years ago. S&P downgraded in 2011 and Fitch downgraded those treasuries in 2023. So Moody's actually downgraded treasuries in May, which is kind of an interesting thing. No concern there. It's still high. You know, obviously AA1, but down from AAA. So you might have seen that also in the news. And then finally, I'd say the other takeaway here is as we've had those treasuries mature, we've invested in some longer term treasuries at higher rate to try to lock ourselves in a little bit longer with the higher rates. So our average security life is now 31 months. I think if you looked at this a year ago, it was in the 20s. So we've seen that kind of creep up. We've sold shorter term 1 and 2 year securities, treasuries mainly, and purchased 3 and 5 year type securities just to try to lock in that higher 4-ish% for the future. So with that concludes the report. I don't know if there's any questions. I'm happy to answer them. Thank
Any
you.
questions of my colleagues regarding the quarterly investment report? No? Anybody of my colleagues online? Okay, seeing none, then we will move on, Mr. Cox, to next topics.
Upcoming topics. All right. So last year, about this time, we came to you for the release of the TTD funds. The Nevada appropriations include funds for TTD. We're going to bring those to you in September for approval. We had some conversation. I know TTD needs these funds. We didn't receive the funds from the state until a couple weeks ago, so we didn't have time to get it into the packet. We're considering maybe a process change for next year to just like put it in the budget so we don't have to bring in action next year. But anyway, that's upcoming for next month. We want to get those funds over to TTD as quickly as we can. So that's a September item. October, we'll bring you the planning fees. Obviously, that's an annual process. We'll look at consumer price index for the Western states and kind of update our rate sheet based on inflation. And we'll bring you those fees for October. And then in November, and we're shooting for November, could go as far as December, but we will be bringing you the 2025 fiscal year audit. So try to get that at least a month earlier, maybe 2. We seem on good track right now. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
Great.
good job.
And then
compared to
obviously
last year.
financials, treasurer's report, all that'll be ongoing. So
Right,
yeah, great.
great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 9, which is committee member comments. Are there any comments by my colleagues? Seeing none in the room, anybody online? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to our public interest comments. Our final matter of business is our general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address operations and governance on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Are there anybody in the room? Good morning, that would like to address the committee?
Good morning, Ellie Waller. I believe this is a governance issue, so I'm bringing it forward to this committee. Yesterday, I attended the Washoe County Board of Commissioners meeting, and a very disturbing issue arose, prompting me to bring this forward to you. I left very confused about what their county council suggested to the commissioners about not complying with TRPA's requirements on phase 2 housing. His comments led the board to believe, in my opinion, they must not say no to phase 2 as presented by their staff, although staff being allowed to work with TRPA to exceed the deadline of December 2024 to possibly get an alternative. It certainly was not clear what options the commissioners were allowed. The vote was 3-1 in favor, 1 absent. That 1 absent would have been not in favor, in my opinion. I strongly urge staff and TRPA council to listen to Washoe County Agenda Item 16 that commenced at 1:18 PM yesterday. This really needs to be looked at. Over 20+ people attended in person and offsite in Incline Village. The only comment in favor was the Washoe County Advisory Planning Commission person, McNamara. The lone board member in opposition stated the board should represent the people's wishes and not be beholden to TRPA's requirements, and to work out something. To ensure there is no future confusion, I'm requesting TRPA staff prepare a presentation that will explain how this process evolved and what options local jurisdictions were allowed. This presentation should also include public comment. I'm going to truncate mine and also add a comment from John Ippolito. He couldn't make it today. On 8/26, the Washoe County Commissioners adopted TRPA's Phase 2. 3 of the commissioners made it sound like it wouldn't matter if they voted yes or no. I don't believe it. All of the commissioners made TRPA out to be the bad guy. Alexis Hill forgot to mention she also is on the TRPA governing board and part of the Phase 2 approvals. Before Hill's vote on the county commission yesterday, she said her other face and made the TRPA look like the bad guy again. Thank you, Mike Clark, who was the only one. Jeannie Herman was not present. Thank you for allowing me to comment today.
Thank you, Ms. Waller. Are there any other members of the public in the room that would like to address the committee? Okay, seeing none, maybe go online, please.
Madam Chair, we have one hand raised so far.
Okay.
And Nichols, please go ahead and address the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. I thought that our, CPA that does a really good job was going to start breaking down contracts. Now, that's $18,600,000 of a $30,700,000 budget. And it's a lot. And I thought he was going to start, so to help the public understand where all this money is going, do that. But, apparently he said he would, and I don't see why it wouldn't be helpful. Also, the meeting yesterday, I wanted you guys to know too, that there was up on the Washoe County Commissioners screen, called it attainable housing, which is Governor Lombardo's definition, which I like, 150% of average median incline. But what they approved, which was very unclear to actually even the commissioners, was achievable. So there's with Phase 3, there's a small A and a large A, and I think TRPA you have achieved confusing everyone about what workforce housing is. There's no definitions. Even in your open houses and incline, you never gave a definition. But anyway, I wish you'd do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Are there any other comments online?
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised for comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll close public comment. And is there a motion? Sorry, Ms. Reagan.
Madam Chair, I know we need to adjourn. Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. I just wanted to just quickly thank the members of the public for their comments and just mention we do have an upcoming Regional Planning Committee meeting to discuss the Washoe County Area Plan. So we'd be happy to answer those questions. And Mr. Cox may have wanted to jump in on this as well, but I believe Ms. Nichols missed the June budget hearing. And in the packet, which we'd be happy to email a link over, there's a detailed breakdown and list of contracts. So it's online. If you go into the June proceedings, you can pull it up in the packet, contracts over a certain amount. And there were a great many listed in that packet as well. And so I just wanted to put those points on the record. Thank you.
Yep, very important. So do you think RTP will take up this item?
The Regional Planning Committee, when we bring the Washoe Area Plan forward, I think in another month or two, but if we have a meeting in the meantime, happy to do it, or I could explain some things in an executive director's report to help. And we'll be happy to reach out individually to some of the members to explain the Phase 2 process.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for adding that information. Thank you to the members of the public for your participation. And with that, we can adjourn. Do I have a motion, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned.